collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, on a visit to the island, announces the opening of part of the fenced-off area of Famagusta.
The announcement was that part of Varosha is opening up. The way for Greek Cypriots to return is to apply to the Movable Property Commission, that is a Turkish domestic remedy in accordance with the European Court of Human Rights. And already there are applications in relation to this property, and we will see how this will be dealt with.
A mob attacks one of our TV and radio stations. Is the problem an underlying one across the globe?
And I think this is a reflection of a global sort of trend as well. I mean, it could be argued that the world today is much more unstable than what it was during the Cold War.
And the Swedish embassy has issued a challenge to young people about sustainable living.
To invite participants to try to think of creative ways to live more sustainably.
The big news, of course, this week was the visit of Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan to the occupied areas of Cyprus. There was a lot of speculation before his arrival about what exactly he was going to say when he addressed the so-called parliament in the north. As it turned out, he didn't say a great deal. We're joined on this week's programme by Nicosia lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis, who's well au fait with the situation in the occupied areas, and particularly Varosha. Achilleas, everybody sort of expected some sort of announcement to be made about changing the status of Varosha, but in actual fact it seems to me that Erdogan didn't say much at all. Do you think he was under pressure from international players to tone it down?
Well, I don't know what prompted his announcement, but in fact he has pointed out that a small part of Varosha, about 3.5% of it, will be opened up for Greek Cypriots to return. In fact, that is the area where a mosque has been restored in the Agios Nikolas parish, for those who can remember. And that area will be demilitarized and open up for settlement. In fact, we understand that there are about 33 applications that are already pending before the Immovable Property Commission that Turkey has set up, and the statement will be put to the test. In particular, we will see whether these applications will be accepted by the administration in the north, and whether people will in fact be allowed to return. So the announcement was that part of Varosha is opening up. The way for Greek Cypriots to return is to apply to the Movable Property Commission, that is a Turkish domestic remedy in accordance with the European Court of Human Rights. And already there are applications in relation to this property, and we will see how this will be dealt with. What is interesting and absent is FGAF. You know the story that FGAF is giving, that it owns the whole of the fenced-up area of Famagusta. Well, it seems that this particular area is not owned by FGAF because there is no such claim. But in any event, the FGAF story is now before the European Court of Human Rights. There is a test case that is currently progressing, and hopefully for the third time, the FGAF argument will be defeated, in the sense that FGAF is not the true owner of Varosha. The true owner is the Greek Cypriot who owns that land in accordance with the records of the land registration of the Republic, and these people should be allowed to return. And if we are going to follow UN resolutions, the UN must take control of Varosha. Of course, Turkey doesn't accept that, and we will see how these things will develop.
Last time we spoke in general about applications to the IPC and whether or not people would return. I understood you to say that even if they did apply to the IPC, there was no compulsion for them, if they got their property, to return and live under Turkish Cypriot administration.
Absolutely. Your memory serves you well. In order to apply to the IPC, that does not mean that you recognize the so-called pseudo-state. It is simply a subordinate to Turkey local administration, and that has been decided by the European Court of Human Rights. So the recognition argument is legally invalid. And the second argument that a lot of people say is that, oh, well, if you apply, you need to go back. Again, that is simply inaccurate. In order to apply, you simply need to get yourself a lawyer. The lawyer will fill in the paperwork. In that paperwork, you will have to have up-to-date certificates of ownership that one can get from the land registration in the Republic of Cyprus. Those certificates will accompany the application, and I believe that there is no need for anyone to return, simply to apply, and the application will take some time to be processed, and of course nothing will happen overnight. But the important thing is that unless you vindicate your rights, unless you claim your rights, the Turks will read this as you abandoning your property, and therefore there is a big possibility that they may give it to someone they consider appropriate to develop it, since you yourself are not claiming it back.
Which brings us to this whole thing of why would Erdogan invite Greek Cypriots to return to their properties if he knows that they can claim them with the IPC and then stay in the south until there's a proper settlement of the whole problem?
Well, I don't know why Erdogan did it. I know what our side should be doing. And as far as our side is concerned, I believe we should pursue a strategy on a two-level approach. The first level is a legal defense before the European Court of Human Rights and by claiming our properties back through the IPC. And the second level is a political counter-attack by following the EU and stating that we want a solution, or by zonal, by communal federation with political equality under the UN resolutions, and following the six-point Guterres framework. If we do that, we regain our credibility as the side who wants a solution after negotiation, and on the basis of that, we start negotiations. I think a big problem is that we have lost credibility because, A, we do not appear as though we really want a solution. For 4 years, where Mr. Akiji was in power, we did nothing to proceed with the solution, whereas now Mr. Tatar is claiming a two-state solution, and now we're saying we want to negotiate. So point one for credibility is that we really have to prove that we are serious for a solution. And point two, which is even more important, is that we have to regain our credibility in relation to the corruption issues that are in place. I remind you of the golden passport scandal, where the EU has already taken us to the European Court twice, once for the program and once for allowing about 1,300 passports to continue being processed when we said that the program has stopped. And I'll give you another example of the corruption, which has just broken out last week. The EU is making a claim for VAT that the Cyprus government failed to charge in relation to the golden passports. It was 14% that they were not charging. The normal rate is 19%. They were only charging 5% to these new Cypriots when they were getting their first home, exploiting a provision which was created in order to comfort people, young couples who could not afford it. Now, I do not believe that people who are buying a golden passport cannot afford 14% VAT, which the government gave away. Now, the point there is that the EU is claiming on behalf of EU taxpayers. That's the small picture. The big picture is that the Cypriot taxpayer lost 14% of every golden passport. So if one assumes that 3 billion was the revenue that we're looking at, 14% on 3 billion is 420 million of tax revenue that the Cypriot taxpayer did not collect. That is a scandal, and that is, again, corruption in relation to the golden passports. Because now the Cypriot taxpayer will have to cough up about 500 million, which otherwise he would not have to do it if the government had properly collected what was due to them. So that's why I'm saying that our credibility is important. The government's credibility is important. It is in tatters now, both because of the corruption and because of our inability to firmly declare that we want a solution on the basis of the UN resolutions.
If we go back to the issue of Varosha and the fenced-off area, assuming then that it is now, or at least the small part of it that you mentioned, is going to be under civilian control, you mentioned the UN taking over. The Turks have always said, no, that's not going to happen. So who actually is going to be in charge?
Well, as things were yesterday, the military were in charge. As things are today, or at least as things are as reported today, the subordinate local administration will take over that area. So that area will be under the same rule as the rest of the occupied areas. And of course, that means that Turkish Cypriots may consider properties that have not been applied for within the IPC as abandoned properties, and therefore consider them as eligible to be handed out to Turkish Cypriots. And that is the real danger if people from Varosha do not apply to the IPC to assert their property rights and put their property outside the list that the Turkish Cypriots consider as abandoned property. That, of course, only applies to a very small part of Varosha and not the rest, which I think is a wake-up call for everyone to understand that this competitive advantage we have in a legal fight to vindicate our properties should be used as it has been for the last 32 years, starting off with the Loizidu judgment.
But it also means, does it not, that it's unlikely that Turkish mainland developers would be invited in to in some way take over and alter these properties? Are we talking more about Turkish Cypriots being given homes there that belong actually to Greek Cypriots? It's happened in many other parts of the occupied areas. Or are we talking about a mainland Turkish takeover to redevelop the area?
Well, I don't know. The point is, we will have to wait and see. The point is that these properties are not the best properties. They're not the ones on the beachfront. That's point one. Point two is that these properties, if not applied for, will be considered abandoned. And if they are considered abandoned by the Turkish Cypriots, then they will set off in distributing them to whoever they believe will do a better job. And that is exactly what I want to avoid by calling on people to claim their properties and thus avoiding the Turkish Cypriots considering them as eligible for distribution because the owner doesn't want to return to it. That is the crucial point. And because we have the judgments from Strasbourg and the legal principle established that ownership rights are respected, something I think even Mr. Erdogan has done, because he has only opened up public areas, the roads, the beach, and the public municipal garden. He has not touched private properties, I think because he understands that property rights are there and are solid. Now, if on our side we do not want to pursue them, then one has to see how this develops. But I think the position now is that people should, as we've been saying all along, organize themselves, and the government should organize this, the municipality, the Chamber of Commerce, the Famagusta lawyers, the Famagusta valuers. All these people should get together, get their act together, and start protecting their properties in an effort, of course, that this will be part of the bigger picture, which is solving the Cyprus problem, as I have already explained, by taking shelter into the EU and getting the EU to help us to reach a solution in the UN after we have reclaimed our credibility before these international bodies.
So you don't think that this move in that small area is a thin end of a wedge?
Well, I don't know what it is. I take it as a negative development in the sense that they've opened up something which was closed, but that is what it is, and we have to react. And for me, the best reaction is to claim these properties so that we fortify the defense against the use by the Turks, in the hope that this is a first step towards a resumption of intercommunal talks so as to solve the Cyprus problem.
Once again, we say a very big thank you to Nicosia lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis for bringing his views to bear on the current issue with the Erdogan visit to the occupied areas of Cyprus.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The other huge story in Cyprus this week was a demonstration that started outside the presidential palace with people demanding an end to the restrictions that have been imposed due to the COVID pandemic. A breakaway group from that demonstration proceeded afterwards to the Lias Media Group building, where they set fire to the security guard's hut, locking him inside for a while. They threw Molotov cocktails that destroyed cars in the car park, and they managed to gain entry to the building, and they trashed it. Now, there was an outrage about this, and an outcry indeed from all sectors of society. But the problem is it indicative of something underlying the psyche of a lot of people, not just in Cyprus, but perhaps around the world today? So it's welcome to the programme to Zenonas Charas, who has taught world politics at Warwick University in the UK and global security at the University of Cyprus. Zenonas, I want to look at this not just in the reflection of Cyprus society, but the fact that this does seem to be something people are angry all over the world, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's frustrating a lot of people, and as the pandemic drags on, people are getting more frustrated because this is affecting their everyday lives on so many levels. This actually comes not many years after we had the breakout of the global financial crisis. And these things tend to, accumulate and pile up and just make people's lives worse. And then they tend to express this anger in different ways and try to find ways of taking down ideas and people who they think are behind different kinds of policies and so on. And then you see related articles on the internet and so on, many fake news that are getting reproduced. And we live in a world that's, where there's so much information, there is so much misinformation, and people don't know how to discern and how to separate what is true and what is false. And then this has an effect on the masses and how they mobilize and what their objectives are. And I think this is a reflection of a global sort of trend as well. I mean, it could be argued that the world today is much more unstable than what it was during the Cold War, because then you have the fear of a global war, but you knew very clearly what the threat was and what the balance was between the two superpowers. Today, there is no such thing. There is a superpower called the US that is unwilling to play a superpower role, and then you have all these other powers, trying to counterbalance each other, and then you have an international mess, basically, with all these conflicts breaking out here and there. And I think this imbalance and this chaos is very much reflected domestically, because democracies are also getting eroded. You have much more, not governmental groups pushing for different objectives and so on. And you have a weak rule of law. I mean, what this pandemic brought about was basically more authoritarian governments and the lack of rule of law. And when you have this incident that we had the other day at Sigma, and you don't immediately have a response, or you have these fires and you don't immediately have a response, and all these incidents that many times go unpunished, then the society just unravels.
How far is it due to the rise in populist politicians, which goes back a few years now, if we look particularly at a couple of European countries, and we haven't escaped here in Cyprus either, have we?
No, I think it's a global phenomenon, and I think Trump was the full embodiment of this phenomenon and actually inspired other politicians around the globe to become more like him. This is the effect that the superpower has. But populism is a very prominent, tendency nowadays because we still have democracies, but politicians are out of arguments and facts, and they don't care so much anymore. And populism serves this objective of gathering the necessary votes without having to actually do anything. You just play with people's feelings and with people's fear, which is basically the worst in human beings, and you create followers out of that without anything tangible to provide to them. I mean, Turkey, which is right next door, is a very good example. I mean, you see all these people living in poverty after the economy deteriorated over the past 5 to 6 years. But still, Erdogan has these followers which amount to around 40% of the electorate because he plays with this nationalist narrative and religious rhetoric about the martyrs that they lose in Syria and Iraq and so on. So people are hungry, but they cling on to their ideals.
It's almost rather depressing, if you ask me, but you mentioned fear, and that does seem to be one of the underlying emotions among people in the street. And I can't understand how that can translate into the sort of attack that we saw on the media here in Cyprus, and a particular media. Any ideas why Dias was picked?
No idea about the latter. From what I read, I understand they had some sort of personal beef with Tsurulis, the head of the group there, because of how he deals with the pandemic news. I'm not sure. It may even be because it's very close to the presidential palace and it was just a target of opportunity. I don't know. But when it comes to fear, I mean, fear is what turns on the survival switch. When you're afraid, then you get into that survival mentality and you can do whatever you think is necessary to survive. And these people, they're so afraid of not knowing the truth about the vaccines, about the virus, about the future, the economic future, that they feel that by doing these protests and some of them doing this breaking stuff and burning stuff up, that they somehow guard their rights and their life.
It sounds to me very much like they're trying to take back control because they feel they've lost it and their politicians are not doing the job that they were elected to do.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right, and I think that's related to what we were saying before, that the governments are more authoritarian. Of course they argue that this is out of necessity because of the pandemic that we're going through, and certain measures need to be imposed and certain liberties need to be withheld and so on. But what the people know is that they are indirectly pushed to do the vaccine, for example. This is how they see it, that they need to now pay rapid tests and so on. So these are issues, perhaps minor issues for some, perhaps reasonable issues for others, but for a large amount of the society, these are huge problems that trump their freedom.
In terms of local security, what would you say the response of the authorities should be? I mean, the police say they've arrested various people, but they also came out and said we didn't want to be too heavy-handed, and as you mentioned also the fires, there was criticism about how that was handled. So what should the response be? Because people won't put up with much more of this authoritarian rule, will they?
Yeah, well, I think they were too late, and indeed not heavy-handed enough. I'm not arguing for violence or anything, but police is a state instrument and needs to do its job when it has to. We had these incidents with Ozdame movement and the water cannon shooting at this girl, and we had excessive violence at that instance. But now, in this instance with Sigma, we didn't have enough, resistance from the police. I think they were too late. Perhaps the forces there were not enough, or perhaps they were unwilling to engage. In any case, if these incidents go unpunished and unopposed from the police at the moment of their happening, then you have other issues emerging, because now this has become a social issue. It's a political debate. People are divided about it, and so on. Now people that participated in the protest, they think that wishes are now being cancelled because of what 30 or 40 people did in Sigma. So bottom line is that the state needs to do its job, and it has not been doing it effectively over the past few years, I would say.
And the bottom line, of course, I would say, is also transparency about how it goes about doing its job. Fascinating conversation. Zenonas Charas, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Last week I popped down to the Home for Cooperation in the Nicosia buffer zone to meet the people who were concerned with the Swedish Embassy's 7-day challenge. They invited their participants to see if they had what it takes to live sustainably for 7 days. What does it all involve? We are joined from the embassy by Marilia Hunsby, who is head of the political affairs and also coordinating all these cultural activities. So what exactly is the idea behind this 7-day sustainable living challenge? It's not just, is it, about recycling or cleaning the environment?
The idea behind the 7-day challenge is that climate issues and environmental issues are very much prioritized by Sweden. And we see that the public debate or awareness about these issues aren't maybe as high here in Cyprus. So we really tried to put these really important issues on the agenda. And the idea comes from the Swedish Institute from the beginning. And we have teamed up with Let's Make Cyprus Green to invite participants to try to think of creative ways to live more sustainably. And basically to think about these issues
in a holistic way, really.
Exactly, like simple, small things they can do in their everyday life, and to inspire others to follow through.
Now, I think that you invited people to apply to be part of this. First of all, how many people have you accepted, and what were the criteria for choosing the ones that are going to be doing it?
So we accepted a bit over 20 participants. Also because of COVID restrictions, we want to be able to gather in a quite safe way. And we mainly chose young Cypriots who expressed a genuine interest in learning and giving this challenge a chance, basically.
Now, you've prepared, I think, a toolkit for them. What does that involve? Is that to, in a sense, educate them about the issues they should be looking at and how each person can make a difference? What's in the toolkit?
It's a framework, basically, but then it's not that we're going to give everyone an individual schedule or assignments like that. The toolkit is basically the concepts with the categories eat, move, and live. And the idea with the whole challenge is to inspire each other and learn from each other. And then everyone will develop their own individual plan. So perhaps someone is already moving sustainably. So perhaps someone doesn't fly somewhere twice a year or drive the car everywhere they're going. Then maybe they will focus on eating more sustainably. So that's the point of the workshop today, to inspire each other, get ideas, discuss what is sustainable and what is not, so that everyone can develop their individual plan.
Now, it runs from Monday until the following Monday, the 19th to the 26th.
Yes.
How are you going to assess how successful it's been?
Everyone will keep us updated every day throughout the challenge. We will have a common closed Facebook group where they will upload photos or videos of what they're doing every day. And we will also do spot checks because we will see their schedules or plans. And then we will do spot checks to see how it's going and if they're living up to the challenge. And then we will also share their experiences through our channels, and hopefully they will share them through their channels and in their own networks. So the long-term goal is to spread the challenge and the lessons learned, basically.
Well, hopefully on your social media pages, the open ones at least, you'll
Exactly.
let people know how it's gone
Exactly.
and what the most successful strategies turned out to be.
Yes.
What a great idea. Eat, Move and Live Sustainably is the 7-day challenge issued by the Swedish Embassy in Cyprus, running from July the 19th to the 26th. And our thanks to Marilja Hansby for telling us all about it. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.